Good morning, students. This is Sujit sir, and in today's class, we shall learn voice change. Now, students, as you all know, voice change is one of the most important sections of English grammar. Let us therefore see how we work on it. First of all, students, we must know how many kinds of voices are there. So students, we should keep in mind that there are two voices. One is the active voice and the other one is the passive voice. From the grammatical point of view, the transformation from active voice to passive voice or from passive voice to active voice is known as the voice change. Let us see how the change takes place. Now here we need to understand what is meant by active voice and what is passive voice. So students, when the subject itself does the work, or in other words, when the subject acts, we may say that the verb is in the active voice. On the other hand, when the subject does not do the work and almost remains inactive, we say that the verb is in passive voice. Now let us see how the transformation takes place in voice change. Now here we can see that there are three parts in the first sentence. And students, we already know that there are always three parts, that is the subject part, the verbal part and the object part in every simple sentence. In the same manner, this particular sentence is also divided into three parts. Here the subject is he, did is the verb, and finally the object is it. Now what exactly happens in voice change? As you can see in the picture, that the object becomes the subject in the passive voice and the subject becomes the object. So when we transform a sentence from active to passive, the subject which is there in the active voice becomes the object in the passive voice, and the object of the active voice becomes the subject of the passive voice. So the sentence in the active voice is he did it. When we come to the passive voice, it becomes it was done by him. So this is the process how we transform a sentence in active voice into passive voice. Now here in this example, we can see that the nominative form of the pronoun, that is he, has become him, and we all know that him is the objective form of the pronoun. Let us now see how the forms of the pronouns are changed. Look at this chart, students. I becomes me, we becomes us in the passive voice, you becomes you, but we all have to understand that the first you is subjective and the you that we get in the passive voice is the objective form of the pronoun. Thereafter, he becomes him, she becomes her, and they becomes them. Now here we need to remember one more important thing, that we cannot transform every sentence into passive. What I mean to say, students, as we have already discussed in our previous classes, that we have as many as three tenses: the present tense, the past tense and the future tense. And we also know at the same time that each of the tenses has four more forms. Like in present tense, we have four forms: simple present tense, present continuous tense, present perfect tense, and finally comes present perfect continuous tense. So we shall get such four forms also in the past tense and in the future tense. So in total, we can say that we have as many as 12 tenses, beginning with the simple present tense and ending with the future perfect continuous tense. Now here we have to keep in mind that sentences in all these 12 tenses can't be transformed into passive voice. Let us now see in which tense or tenses voice change is not possible. Now as you can see here, number 4, number 8, number 10 and number 12, that is the present perfect continuous tense, the past perfect continuous tense, the future continuous tense and the future perfect continuous tense. In these 4 tenses, we can't change any sentence into passive voice. So voice change is possible only in case of the remaining 8 tenses, that is simple present tense, present continuous tense, present perfect tense, simple past tense, past continuous tense, past perfect tense, simple future tense and finally future perfect tense. And the other 4 which I have just told you and those which are written in yellow color cannot be transformed into passive voice. Let us now see the rules which we should follow while transforming a sentence from active to passive. Now as we have already discussed that the subject becomes the object and vice versa. So that will take place in every case. Apart from that, we need to bring about some more changes. What is that? Like in case of simple present tense, after changing the object into subject, we have to use any one of these 3 auxiliary verbs. That is, there will either be am or is or are, and it will be followed by the past participle form of the verb given in the active voice or the third form of the verb given in the active voice. In case of present continuous tense, there will either be am or is or are followed by being and followed by the past participle form of the verb. In case of present perfect tense, there will either be have or has, whichever is applicable for the given subject, and after which will come been, as you can see, and it will be followed by the third form of the verb. In case of simple past tense, we have to use either was or were followed by the past participle form of the verb. In case of past continuous tense, there will either be was or were followed by being and followed by the third form of the verb. In case of past perfect tense, it will always be the auxiliary verb had. It will be followed by been and finally will come the third form of the verb. In case of simple future tense, there will either be shall or will followed by be followed by the third form of the verb. Now here I need to tell you something, as we have already discussed that the first person singular number and the first person plural number take shall and not will. So here we need to be careful. And finally, in case of future perfect tense, there will either be shall or will followed by have been and followed by the past participle form of the verb. Let us now see some of the examples. Look here, students, as we have just discussed that voice change is not possible in all the tenses. So if you notice carefully on the left hand side where there are sentences in active, there is no sentence in present perfect continuous tense or in past perfect continuous tense or in future continuous tense or in future perfect continuous tense. Because as we have discussed earlier, voice change is not possible in these four tenses. Now look at the first sentence in the active voice. It is I write a letter, and we can also understand that the subject is here I, the verb is write, and finally the object is a letter. Now as I have told you earlier, the object becomes the subject. So look at the right side, students. The object has become the subject. Therefore, a letter has come in the beginning, followed by one of the three be verbs, that is either am or is or are. And we all know that the subject, a letter, is always followed by is, neither by am nor by are. Thereafter, we have used the third form of the verb, that is the past participle form of the verb. And finally, what do we have in the subject? In the active voice, it is I, which has become me in the passive voice. So this is how we transform a sentence from active voice to passive voice. I am writing a letter. This is in present continuous tense. Therefore, being will be added after the auxiliary verb. And look at the sentence in the passive voice. It has become a letter is being written by me. In present perfect tense, I have written a letter, which has become a letter has been written by me in the passive. Now in the simple past tense, it is I wrote a letter, which has become a letter was written by me. So in case of simple past tense, as we have already discussed, every time it will either be was or were followed by the third form of the verb. In case of past continuous tense, look at the sentence, students. I was writing a letter, which has become a letter was being written by me. Then in past perfect tense, I had written a letter, which has become a letter had been written by me. In case of simple future tense, I shall write a letter, and in the passive, it has become a letter will be written by me. Now here let me remind you, in the active voice, the auxiliary verb was shall. Why was it so? Because the subject was first person singular number. Now here we have got a new subject, because every time the object becomes the subject, and the object in the active voice was a letter, which has become the subject here. Therefore, the subject has been changed. Now it will no longer take shall. It will rather take will. Therefore, we have used will, and the sentence has become a letter will be written by me. And finally, in case of future perfect tense, it is I shall have written a letter in the active voice, which has become a letter will have been written by me in the passive voice. So here we have got a clear idea about how a sentence in the active voice is transformed into passive voice. We have many more things to understand in voice change. We have discussed only the basic things. In the next class, we shall continue our discussion on voice change in different kinds of sentences. So I advise every one of you to keep these rules in your mind, because these rules will always be followed whenever we transform a sentence from active to passive or from passive to active. See you all in the next class. Thank you.